I'm now currently serving in my 44th year as a member of Congress and focus very, very aggressively on human rights abuse around the world. I'm the author of many human rights laws, including the Trafficking Victims Protection Act of 2000 and 4 subsequent anti-human trafficking laws, as well as 4 laws on religious freedom and many other laws that deal with democracy and human rights. Since late 2022, Brazilians have been subject to human rights violations committed by Brazilian officials on a very large scale. Documented or credibly reported rights violations in Brazil include the political abuse of legal procedures to persecute political opposition, including jailing opposition figures on spurious charges, violations of freedom of speech, media freedom, including persecution of journalists, the silencing of opposition media, the banning of individuals from social media, thinly veiled censorship laws claiming to fight so-called disinformation, and many violations of the rule of law and judicial malfeasance. Already in December of 2022, Mary O'Grady, who writes a weekly column on Latin America for the Wall Street Journal, noted the danger, and she said, and I quote her in part, "A greater threat is the 11-member Supreme Court, which is overstepping its jurisdiction and flouting the rule of law for political reasons, without consequences. When the highest court becomes an ally of ideological and corrupt politicians, democracy is in grave danger. Brazil has arrived at such a moment," she goes on. "The court censored other political speech from business leaders, elected members of Congress, and news and entertainment platforms on the right. This has been carried out with assistance from Electoral Tribunal's Special Advisory to combat disinformation. It acts as a ministry of truth." In January of 2023, the New York Times reported, referring to Brazilian Supreme Court Justice Alexandre Moraes, quote, "Using a broad interpretation of the court's powers, he has pushed to investigate and prosecute, as well as to silence on social media, anyone who he deems a menace to Brazil's institutions. He has jailed people without trial for posting threats on social media, helped sentence a sitting congressman to nearly 9 years in prison for threatening the court, ordered raids on businessmen with little evidence of wrongdoing, suspended an elected governor from his job, and unilaterally blocked dozens of accounts and thousands of posts on social media with virtually no transparency or room for appeal. In the hunt for justice after the riot this month," he went on, or the New York Times went on, he has become further emboldened. He orders his orders to ban prominent voices online have proliferated, close quote. That's the New York Times. Many Brazilians have maintained that concerns regarding these issues have become much more serious since January 2023, and that such violations have greatly undermined democracy, freedom, and the rule of law in Brazil. As chairman of the Global Human Rights Committee, I am committed to supporting internationally recognized human rights in Brazil and to conducting oversight on the response of the U.S. government to these violations. I will chair a hearing on human rights abuse in my subcommittee in the coming weeks. What I see in Brazil today, above all, in the investigations of the Supreme Court Justice Moraes, is called rule by law, the opposite of rule of law. Rule of law is supposed to put aside law outside of politics, so that the same laws apply equally to all people. Rule by law, in contrast, means that while some forms and procedures of law are maintained, the law is used selectively as an instrument of political power. There is vast evidence that this is exactly what is going on in Brazil today, where investigations, inquiries, media bans, content removal orders are used to single out the opposition to President Lula. I am preparing legislation that will address these issues. We will call it the Brazil Democracy, Freedom, and Human Rights Act, and I hope to be introducing it very shortly. We will hear now from Brazilians, including elected officials, that I believe their position and responsibilities as elected officials make them a truly valuable source of insight into the situation
porque
in
eles
Brazil.
têm uma
uniquely
informação
qualified to
ou várias
present the
informações
concerns
específicas de
of
quem
the
está
people
vivendo
of
toda
Brazil.
essa perseguição no
And
Brasil.
we will be joined, I believe, by Congressman
Eu,
Ronnie Jackson as well, who has
eu
expressed he's a rear
aqui
admiral for
estou
25 years
está me
of naval
acompanhando
service, a
o
member of Congress from the great state of Texas. He's in
congressista
total
Ronnie
solidarity
Jackson
with what we're
do
doing
Texas.
today, and he should be coming along.
E ele
He's not
vai
here
chegar
yet,
aqui
but I
daqui a
would like
pouco.
to
Mas eu
introduce
gostaria de
Eduardo
apresentar
Bolsonaro, a member of the Chamber of Deputies
Eduardo
of Brazil,
Bolsonaro,
for any comments that he might have.
dos parlamentares congressistas brasileiros.
First of all, thank you, Chris, to give us this opportunity.
Primeiro,
We're very
muito
honored,
obrigado
and we want
por
to bring here some light for
estar
what is
aqui.
going on in Brazil. My name is
É
Eduardo
muita
Bolsonaro.
honra para
I'm the
nós
most
estar aqui
voted
para
ever
dizer o que
congressman in the
está
history of Brazil,
acontecendo no Brasil.
also
Eu sou
son of President
o
Bolsonaro and former
congressista mais
chairman of the
votado do
41st
Brasil.
and National Defense Committee. I have always warned in my speeches in the
Eu
Congress about the
sempre
dangers of my
alertei nos
country
meus
turning into a
discursos
Cuba or
no
Venezuela
Congresso
with their
brasileiro
concentration camps.
sobre o perigo de
Today,
o nosso
unfortunately,
parlamento se
I
transformar, o
live
nosso país
in
se
my own
transformar na
movie
Venezuela. E
about
hoje
the Gulag. And for those who
nós
think I'm
estamos aqui para
exaggerating,
mostrar
I will
para o
cite
mundo o que
here
está acontecendo
few
no
simple
Brasil.
names.
Nós,
Felipe
eu
Martins,
tenho
the international
alguns
advisor
nomes
to
para
President
apresentar.
Bolsonaro,
Felipe
as
Martins,
Jared
dos
Kushner
assessores
was to President
internacionais
Trump.
do
A brilliant
Bolsonaro,
young
como
man
o
in
Jared
his
Kushner
30s with a
foi para o
promising
Trump.
future,
Homem,
imprisoned
jovem,
by an exceptional
aprisionado,
tribunal,
jovem com
accused of a
uma
coup
carreira
d'etat
brilhante à
never
frente.
attempted or
E
planned, and without the hope of
ele é
minimally
acusado de
fair
crime que ele
treatment,
nunca
as
cometeu.
due process
Não teve
and broad
nenhum
defense no longer
tratamento
exists in
justo.
Brazil.
Isso porque a
Colonel
justiça não
Câmara,
existe
the
mais no
Bolsonaro
Brasil.
security
Coronel
detail,
Câmara,
who is now also in jail,
dos
accused of
seguranças
an
do
imaginary
Bolsonaro,
coup d'etat.
acusado de
And like them,
golpe de
veterinarians,
Estado.
gospel singers, sign language
Veterinários,
interpreters, comedians as
intérpretes
Bismarck
de
Fugas, and
Libras,
even a homeless
e
and a person
mesmo
diagnosed
homem, sem
with a high
teto,
degree of autism, all of
foi
them
com alto
imprisoned,
grau de
accused
autismo, foi
of a coup d'etat.
aprisionado
It's
pelo
very clear
Alexandre de
that
Moraes
all this
como
oppression and
golpista.
cruelty is
Toda essa
just a
opressão e
step towards the
crueldade
ultimate
é
goal
passo
to
a mais
imprison my
para
father, the president who
o
dared
caminho, o
to
processo
put the
de
interests
investigar
of
e
Brazilians
aprisionar
first.
o meu pai.
My father is now
Meu
persecuted
pai
and
não
slandered in the most various ways. As
Meu pai
in
tem sido
every
perseguido de várias
tyranny,
formas,
the
como
limit
em
of the
toda
ridiculous no
tirania,
longer exists.
a ideia
And he
de
even faces the
o regime
accusation
da
of
lei
having
não
committed
existe.
the
Ele não é
terrible
acusado
crime
ele é
of
acusado de
disturbing a whale.
ter
That's not a joke.
cometido
He's
crime
criminally charged
muito
for passing by a
cruel
whale on a jet ski.
de
And the most impressionant thing
perturbar uma baleia.
is the
E a coisa mais
complaint
impressionante
was made by Lula da Silva's environmental minister.
essa
This is more
acusação
ridiculous
veio da
than what
ministra do Meio
Trump's
Ambiente do Lula.
charge than what
E
Trump
isso tem
is
muito a
having
ver com o que o
as
Trump
charged
está
here in the United States.
passando aqui nos Estados Unidos.
My father is also
Meu
accused of
pai também é
attempting
acusado
a coup
de
d'etat
tentar
when he
golpe
was
de
no longer
Estado
president.
quando ele não
The
mais era
judiciary,
presidente.
appointed by
O
the Communist
judiciário
Party in power, want
designado
us to
pelo
believe that my
Partido
father
Comunista
waited
no
to leave
poder
power,
disse
and
que meu pai
when he no
esperou
longer had
até
armed forces under his
depois
command,
dele sair do
attempt
poder, quando ele
a
não tinha
coup
mais
d'etat
força,
with
para
elderly and
cometer
unarmed
crime
women,
de
all of
golpe
these
militar,
thousands of
golpe
kilometers
contra a
away
nação.
from Brazil, when my
Quando ele
father
estava
was on
milhares de
vacations in the
distância
United
do Brasil,
States.
quando meu pai estava no
Going to the
Brasil,
end,
nos Estados Unidos.
they want us to believe, Mr. Chris
Eles querem
Smith,
que nós
that women,
acreditemos
elderly ladies, and all kinds of ordinary
mulheres
citizens,
e todos os
unarmed,
tipos de
are a
cidadãos
danger to
sem
the rule
armas
of law.
eram
And those
perigo para o
violating
regime
the
da lei,
rights and fundamental guarantees
violando as
are the
garantias
saviors. Ladies and
dos
gentlemen,
cidadãos.
these stories are not something that
Essas
someone
histórias
told me.
não são coisas
We
que
are
alguém me
living
disse.
this right now,
Estamos vivendo
and
isso agora
with
no
not
Brasil.
even a single
Sem
word from Biden
nenhuma
administration, State
palavra
Department,
da
or any
administração do
governmental
Biden ou
authority
do
from the
Secretaria
homeland
de
of democracy, the United States of America.
Secretaria de
The
Estado
dozen
dos Estados
colleagues
Unidos.
that are following me here
Os colegas
also
que
will
estão
talk
comigo hoje
about terrifying situations.
vão contar
Brazil,
sobre situações
unfortunately,
terríveis.
is not a
O
democracy
Brasil
anymore.
não é
Thank you.
uma democracia mais. Muito obrigado.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Eduardo.
I'd like to now introduce Gustavo Geyer, who's a member of
gostaria
the
de
Council of Deputies.
convidar Gustavo Geyer,
First, I'd like to thank you, Congressman, for giving us time and a
Muito
platform
obrigado,
to come here
ah,
today and talk about what's happening in
deputado.
Brazil.
Eu
This is
quero vir
something
aqui,
that we no
estou vindo aqui
longer
para
have
falar
in
sobre
our
o que está
nation.
acontecendo no
We no
Brasil.
longer have the
Nós
privilege
não
of
temos mais
saying the
uma
truth,
nação, nós não
saying
temos
what we
mais
think, and giving our
uma,
opinion.
o
So to
direito de
start, I'd
dizer o
like
que
to
nós
ask you a simple
pensamos e dar a
question.
nossa opinião.
Is
Começo com
Venezuela
uma
a
questão.
democracy or a dictatorship?
Hoje, a
I
minha
believe all
pergunta é:
of
a
you here
Venezuela
today
é
agree
uma
with me that
democracia ou
Venezuela
uma
is not a
ditadura?
democracy. It's
Todos nós
far from
sabemos
it.
que
It's
a
a
Venezuela não é
dictatorship.
mais uma
But then I have another
democracia, é
question. Does
uma
Venezuela have a
ditadura.
Supreme Court?
A Venezuela tem
Does
uma
Venezuela
Corte
have
Suprema,
a
a
Ministry of
Venezuela tem
Education? Does
ministro da
Venezuela have
Educação, a
Congress?
Venezuela tem
Does Venezuela
Congresso,
have
a Venezuela tem
public ministry? No. Yes, they have. But
Ministério
they are no
Público. Sim,
longer a
eles têm tudo
democracy.
isso, mas eles
Because
não
all these
são mais uma
institutions that are
democracia,
valuable
porque
for
todas
democracy have been kidnapped
as
and are
instituições da
served as an
democracia
instrument of
estão
oppression.
servindo
They are
como
served
instrumento
only
de
as to
opressão
arrest and oppress people for their
para
opinions.
prender
And
e oprimir e
what we
perseguir
have today in
pessoas.
Brazil is
O que
exactly the
hoje nós
same
temos
thing.
no Brasil,
Our
basicamente é a
Supreme
mesma
Court
coisa.
in
Nossa
Brazil
Suprema
does not
Corte no
protect the
Brasil
Constitution
não
anymore.
protege
As a
mais
matter of
a
fact, they
democracia
are
e a
releasing
Constituição.
drug dealers,
Na
they are
verdade,
releasing
eles
criminal
estão
leaders of trafficking,
soltando
and they are
líderes
putting
de
in prison
tráfico e
congressmen,
colocando
simple people
na
for their
cadeia
opinions.
pessoas simples e
The reason why
cidadãos
the
comuns
leader of opposition is
pelo
not
crime
here
de opinião.
today, Carlos Jordi,
A
the leader of
pessoa,
the
o líder do
opposition in
nosso
our
partido, o
Congress is
líder
not
da
here today because he
oposição do
had his
partido não está aqui
passport
porque ele
seized.
teve o seu
He can no
passaporte
longer leave
confiscado.
his country
Ele
to
não
tell
pode
the
deixar
world
o
what's
seu país
happening in
mais para
Brazil.
dizer ao
Many
mundo o
other
que está acontecendo no
congressmen are
Brasil.
not here
Muitos
today
outros
because they
congressistas
have had
não
their
estão aqui
passports
hoje
seized.
porque eles tiveram
There's
seus
something called
passaportes
a
retidos.
fishing expedition.
Existe
Pretty
uma
much
coisa chamada
everyone
fishing
beside me here
expedition.
today has suffered.
Todos
We've
nós
had
aqui
our houses
sofremos
invaded
disso.
by the
Tivemos a
federal
nossa
police on
casa
a decision of Alexandre de
invadidas
Moraes,
pela
trying to
polícia
fight
na
something
decisão
against
do
us
Alexandre de
because
Moraes.
we tell the truth,
Porque
because
nós
of our
estamos falando a
opinions.
verdade por
In
causa das nossas
Brazil, the
opiniões.
most dangerous
No
thing you can
Brasil,
do today
a
is
coisa
tell
mais
your
séria que
opinion,
você
speak
pode
about
dizer hoje é
speak your
falar
mind.
a
But if
sua
you
mente,
do drug dealing,
dar a
if
sua
you
opinião.
murder
Mas se
people,
você
if you do
matar
any other
pessoas, se
crime,
você
you will be
traficar drogas,
defended actually.
você vai ser
So we are here
defendido.
today using
Então
this
estamos
platform that
aqui
you
hoje
so
usando essa
gratefully gave
plataforma
us
que vocês
to
nos
tell the
deram
world that
para
Brazil
dizer
is
ao
no
mundo
longer a
que o Brasil
democracy.
não é mais uma
What is happening
democracia.
in our country can happen in your country as well.
Isso pode
Pay
acontecer no
attention to
nosso
our
país
country.
também.
There
Preste
was a
atenção ao
poll
nosso
conducted
país.
recently in Brazil to
Houve uma
3,000 people, I believe,
pesquisa no
asking them
Brasil
if
com
they
3 mil
believe they
pessoas
live in a
perguntando se
democracy
eles
or if
acreditam
they live in a
viver numa
dictatorship of the
democracia
judiciary.
ou
Believe it or
ditadura
not,
do judiciário.
half the
Acreditem ou
people
não,
answered
metade das
that we
pessoas
live today
responderam que
under
nós vivemos numa ditadura
dictatorship of judiciary.
do
Half the
judiciário.
population of
Metade
our
da
country
população do
understands
nosso país
that Brazil is
entende
no longer a
que o
democracy.
Brasil não é mais uma
More than
democracia.
half of the
Mais da
congressmen
metade
also
do
believe that,
Congresso
also
acredita
understand that,
nisso
but they are
também,
afraid to
entende
act.
isso, e
And the
estão
reason they
com
are
medo
afraid
de
to act
dizer.
is
E
because
o
the
medo, o
moment we
princípio
try
é
to
que a
pass a
razão que
bill,
estão
giving
com
back the
medo
Congress
é
the
que
leadership or the right to pass
eles não
bill
querem
or to
entregar de
legislate,
volta
we immediately
entregar o poder
suffer
de volta ao
intimidation.
Congresso.
Phone calls from ministers
Intimidação.
of the justice
Recebemos ligações
harassing
telefônicas
and
dos
threatening
ministros
congressmen
da
if
Suprema
they don't
Corte
do exactly
ameaçando
what the Supreme
os
Court
congressistas se
says.
eles não fizerem
So
o que
I'm
a
here
Suprema
today
Corte quer que eles
representing the
façam.
leader of the opposition, Carlos Jordi, who
Então,
was not
como
able to be here
estou aqui
today,
representando o
representing
líder da
Daniel
oposição
Silveira,
no Brasil,
congressman who was also
representando
arrested,
Daniel
and many
Silveira,
others.
um
Carla
congressista
Zambelli,
preso
who
e
cannot
muitos
be here
outros.
today
Carla
because her
Zambelli, que não pôde
passport
estar
was
aqui porque seu
seized.
passaporte
This
foi
can no longer
confiscado.
continue the way it
Isso não
is.
pode continuar a
And to finish,
acontecer.
I would like you
Para
to take a look at the
terminar,
faces of all
eu
my
quero
friends who are here beside me
olhar
today.
as faces
These
de
brave
todos
men
que
and
estão aqui
women.
hoje, esses
These
homens e
people
mulheres
now
bravos.
are
Essas
at
pessoas
risk of the moment we
estão
set foot
em
back in Brazil.
risco
We
agora
can be
quando nós
arrested, we can
voltarmos para o
suffer
Brasil. Qualquer um
search
de
and
nós
seizure,
pode
we
ser
can have our
preso quando
lives
voltarmos
destroyed.
para o Brasil.
Why? Because of corruption?
Por quê? Por
Because we
causa da
steal public
corrupção.
money? No.
Por
Because
causa
we're
do
fighting for
dinheiro.
real democracy.
Porque nós
Because we don't
estamos
want to see
lutando pela
Brazil
democracia.
becoming a
Nós não queremos
Venezuela
ver
if
o
it's not,
Brasil se
if that's
tornar
not too late.
Venezuela.
So I would like to thank every congressman and
Eu quero
congresswoman who are
agradecer a
standing here
todos
beside me
os
today for having the
representantes
courage
congressistas
come
por
here
terem a
and
coragem de
commit a
vir
crime
aqui
in Brazil, which is tell the truth. Thank you very
e
much.
dizer a verdade ao mundo. Muito obrigado.
Gustavo, thank you for that very, very powerful, as well as you, Eduardo, as well. Very, very powerful witness, and for standing up for the people of Brazil. You know, we stand in solidarity with the people of Brazil.
Pessoal da
Not
live,
with
eu
oppression. And,
vou
that's what
parar.
you
Então,
are
eu estou
doing.
vendo muitos de
That's what you
vocês
want.
dizendo que
That's
está
your
muito
vision.
misturado. Eu
So thank
vou
you.
parar a
We will now hear
tradução.
from
Depois eu
Marcel
explico para o Paulo,
Manhattan,
ok?
a member of the Chamber of Deputies of Brazil.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you in the name of the Brazilian people for this opportunity we have here to speak up, to say what is going on in Brazil more freely than we can do in our own country, unfortunately. Thank you, America, for the long-standing relationship with Brazil. The United States of America is the largest democracy in the Americas. Brazil is the second largest, or used to be. We all know that democracy is an ongoing process, while freedom, as Ronald Reagan once said, is not passed on to our children in the bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on for them to do the same. This is why we are here, to fight for our freedoms and to call to the world's attention the severe setbacks we are experiencing today in Brazil's democracy, freedom, and rule of law. When I first arrived in Washington, D.C. 15 years ago to study at Georgetown University, and I'm very proud of that, I looked at Latin America and saw how socialism was subverting countries that were once democracies. Venezuela, Bolivia, Ecuador. While those countries were succumbing to tyrants like Hugo Chavez and other puppets of Fidel Castro, and while their people were losing their freedoms, Brazil remained democratic despite the country's historical institutional flaws and endemic corruption. That was the year 2009. Throughout the decade of 2010, Brazil entered a new era in which I was very optimistic. We all were. It was a period of time when millions of concerned citizens took to the streets to protest widespread corruption pervading our country's leadership. Operation Car Wash brought these issues to justice and put dozens of businessmen, public servants, and politicians behind bars for money laundering and corruption, including the then former president Lula da Silva. He was found guilty as charged in 3 instances and sent to jail to serve a 9-year sentence. Not only in Brazil, by the way, but also Peru, Guatemala, and Panama had presidents convicted by corruption in their countries because of the investigations that started in Brazil involving transnational companies that also operated abroad. However, in the beginning of 2019, Operation Car Wash began investigating another branch of power in Brazil, the judiciary. Whistleblowers exposed bribing schemes in the justice system all the way to the Supreme Court. When the story was published in the media, all hell broke loose. The Supreme Court's president at the time, Dias Toffoli, an alleged participant in the bribing scheme, decided to censor Cruzoé magazine and opened an investigation accusing them of spreading fake news. Justice Toffoli appointed Justice Alexandre de Moraes to become the rapporteur judge of the case. The investigation, actually an inquisition, has the Supreme Court as an alleged victim, investigator, and judge at the same time. It is still open 5 years later and has been weaponized to persecute anyone whom the court itself understands to be criticizing it or opposing the views of its members. The number of people criminally prosecuted, or should I say more accurately, persecuted, by Justice Moraes and the court amount to thousands of Brazilians right now. Some of those here, some of those can't return to the country. From ordinary citizens to members of parliament, including the leader of the opposition, as just mentioned by my colleague Gustavo Geyer, journalists, opinion makers, and even judges. We have a judge right here that also asked for political asylum in the United States and is living here right now. From a homeless individual who was just absolved by Mr. Moraes after serving a lengthy prison sentence for being at the January 8th event by chance, to the former president of the Republic, Bolsonaro. Nobody escapes the rage and unconstitutional acts and decisions of the court. Assets frozen illegally, bank accounts secretly breached with no due process, passports taken, censorship, even torture. This is the case of Mr. Clériston Pereira da Cunha, known in Brazil as Clezão, who died in prison after spending 11 months in poor health conditions behind bars, including 2.5 months after an order for his release that was signed by the general prosecutor, but it was ignored by Mr. Alexandre de Moraes. On the other hand, the convictions of corrupt politicians are being annulled by the Supreme Court, as was the case of Lula, who was released from jail and allowed to campaign for the presidency again by a Supreme Court decision contrary to the ruling of the lower courts. Businesses that were fined for their bribing schemes are being absolved too, and the fines are being canceled by the same court. What we are experiencing in Brazil right now is a developing dictatorship. It is therefore not surprising that Lula da Silva's biggest allies are dictators, such as Venezuela's Maduro, China's Xi Jinping, and Russia's Vladimir Putin. Even the terrorist group Hamas sent congratulations to Lula as he returned to power, and is now congratulating Lula on his absurd remarks towards Jews and the state of Israel, comparing the legitimate defense acts of Israel to the Holocaust in Hitler's Germany, sorry. Different than other dictatorships, however, the one we are seeing in Brazil is built in a more subtle and dangerous way. The judicial system itself is leading the institutional rupture, which makes it more difficult for the world to understand this sad and dangerous process. People tend to trust judges more than they tend to trust politicians. In Brazil, however, trust in the Supreme Court has fallen dramatically. A recent poll by Atlas Intel shows that more than 50% of the population has lost completely the trust in the courts, corroborating the feeling that the decisions of the Supreme Court are rather political than legal, constitutional, or just. I repeat, Mr. Congressman, our goal here is to make the situation well known to the world. We love our country. We love Brazil. We love the United States of America. We love freedom and we love democracy. And we understand that these virtues are only possible where there is strong rule of law. 15 years after living in the city of Washington, D.C. as a student, I look back to my own country, now as a member of Congress, with maybe a more realistic view, if not sad. This very opportunity that you give us, however, to share this message with you, with the American people, and with all the world, renews our optimism and hope. As much as we love America, none of us want to live in another country. We want to live in another Brazil. God bless America. God bless Brazil. God bless you all. Thank you so much.
Marcel, thank you for that very eloquent defense of the people of Brazil and for speaking so boldly, as you all have, a message that needs to be heard by Congress, by the White House, by the State Department, and frankly, by the world. So thank you so very much for that. Paulo Figueiredo, an independent award-winning journalist who is, we have met and we've spoken, and I've learned so much from him. I want to thank him for being here. Paulo, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you. How's everyone doing? It's a beautiful, It's a beautiful day here in the capital and a historical day for Brazil. So I want to express my gratitude to Congressman Smith. You are a true champion of the human rights and a friend of the Brazilian people. So I would like to ask for a round of applause to Congressman Smith. He is unbelievable. He's unbelievable. He renews my faith in this country. Ladies and gentlemen, I stand before you as a living testament of Brazil's democracy crisis. Until 2022, I was the most watched political journalist in the country during prime time on cable TV. At that time, I also had 5 million followers across various social media platforms. Then, overnight, my social media was blocked in Brazil, my Brazilian passport was canceled, and my bank accounts were frozen by order of the Supreme Court Justice Alexandre de Moraes. 10 days later, under Lula da Silva, the Brazilian Department of Justice launched an investigation against the network I worked for, Jovem Pan, whom you all know, which then fired all the conservative commentators, including my colleagues, Marco Antonio Costa and Gerson Gomes, who are actually here in the audience today. The persecution recently escalated with a ridiculous claim that I had participated in a coup simply by accurately reporting on the behind-the-scene activities of the Brazilian armed forces. This is called reporting, journalism. The legacy media should try it sometime. I have been living in the United States for the better part of a decade, but now it's different. I live in exile, unable to return to my homeland. I wish I could say I'm the only one in this situation, but I'm not. Dozens of journalists are being persecuted, with several also exiled here in the US. I must mention the notable case of journalist Alan dos Santos, present here in the audience, whose arrest was ordered by Justice Moraes for crimes of opinion, and the extradition denied by the United States government. Or the case of the liberal podcaster Monarch, who I guess is also here today, having fled to America after his social media platforms were taken down and his life was ruined by Justice Moraes for merely questioning our electoral system and the ongoing censorship in Brazil. Tens of thousands of ordinary citizens had their social media taken down by the same Alexandre de Moraes. My friends, I assure you, these are all facts. And regardless of your political stance, you do not want to live in a country where one man can determine what can be said. That's why this violates all human rights and international treaties, even the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which guarantees freedom of expression and of the press, regardless of frontiers. All this also violates my rights, protected under the Constitution of the United States of America, since all my journalist activity was conducted while living here, therefore under American jurisdiction and protected by the sacred First Amendment. Let me put it clearly. What's happening in Brazil is criminal. And unfortunately, this crime has accomplished interfered in the Brazilian election to guarantee the election of Lula da Silva. Even now, friends of George Soros and the Foro de São Paulo in the Democratic Party seek to silence our voices. And how did Lula da Silva repay all these good services provided by the Democrats? He has antagonized every single American interest globally, aligning Brazil with Hamas, Venezuela, Cuba, Russia, Iran, and of course, China. Under his leadership within the BRICS, Brazil has actively working with China towards ending the dollar's dominance as the international trade currency. This must end. I urge the United States Congress members to exert their oversight responsibilities to promote the American geopolitical interests and to restore the inalienable human rights given to all of us by our Creator. As this country founding fathers so well described. This is what we ask for. God bless America. God bless Brazil.
Oh, thank you so very much. And thanks for reminding us of what Lula has done since taking office. I chair the China Commission. I've chaired 99 congressional hearings on human rights abuse by the People's Republic of China, by the Chinese Communist Party, and especially under Xi Jinping, where he is actually committing current day genocide against the Uyghurs. And then Lula, when asked, there's nothing but fawn over Xi Jinping. Ditto for Maduro, ditto for Cuba. And of course, it is very discouraging when the president of a country compares, not discouraging, it's outrageous, as you have pointed out, compares Israel and what they're doing against a terrorist attack by Hamas. And I would remind everyone to not just look at what they do, read what they say. The Hamas Charter of 1988 makes clear that they want every Jew dead. It couldn't be clearer. And they want the evisceration of Israel itself. And yet he compares, Lulu that is, compares what they're doing to defend themselves against Hamas to be equivalent to the Holocaust. That is outrageous. So thank you for reminding us of that. Our final speaker will
We
be
are sorry as Brazilians to hear our president could say so. Such absurd.
Andres Martinez Fernandez, who is Senior Policy Analyst for Latin America at the Heritage Foundation, and who will speak now. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman. When I was approached by the congressman to engage on these issues, what we're seeing in Brazil, I was eager to accept because what we're observing is a very dangerous decline in the basic fundamentals of democracy and human rights in Brazil. And unfortunately, it's not getting attention. And I think the scope of this, obviously, we've heard, but the attendance that we have here from these prominent leaders in Brazil coming all the way here to highlight this challenge underlines the gravity of the situation in Brazil. So I thank all of you and Congressman for highlighting this issue. Unfortunately, what we're seeing in the case of Brazil is a very dangerous but not new trend for Latin America and the world, in which we see the criminalization of dissent and opposition, the use of state power and judicial prosecutions to silence dissent and to empower a certain ideological or leading ruler, and that's what we've seen time and again throughout the region. And as some have pointed out, in Venezuela, it took that country down the path of crisis, and I worry that we are seeing a similar tendency in Brazil, and certainly what we're seeing, what we've heard from these speakers, aligns with that severity of this concern. And for those who think that this is going to be this kind of politicization of judicial activism is limited to just a few opposition voices, this is going to expand beyond that, and we're already seeing that with new actions going after independent NGOs, which are well respected in this city, including particularly Transparency International, which has been targeted by investigation in the Supreme Court for highlighting some of the abuses that they are seeing, some of the malpractice in the judicial system in Brazil. That has been rewarded with a special fishing expedition, as some have highlighted in Brazil against that organization. So this is something that I hope we see more attention from the media and from outside of just the right of center bloc, because this is really an issue that addresses and impacts the broader freedom of speech and political rights in a country which is the largest, economically speaking, in Latin America, has very, very significant implications for the United States. We've already heard some of the challenges that we've seen as far as the current leadership in Brazil not aligning with the United States, working in many instances at cross purposes with the United States and U.S. influence in the region. But despite that, we've really seen silence from the Biden administration. And if anything, a praise for the current government. We saw Secretary Blinken very recently down in Brazil praising the government for its actions on workers' rights and environmental rights, but no mention of the endangerment of political. A broader trend that we've seen with this administration, particularly in Latin America, of a deeply ideological focus and alignment for its foreign policy and its engagement in the region. So, I mean, you could be assured that if we were seeing a fraction of what we're seeing in Brazil, if we were seeing that in Argentina under President Milei or any other conservative government, the United States would have by now issued numerous statements and unleashed sanctions to respond. So this is a situation that merits response from the United States to ensure that we do not see Brazil go down a dangerous path that it's treading on currently. So I thank you once again to everyone for coming here and highlighting this, coming all the way from Brazil, and also to Congressman Smith for highlighting this issue.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the press? I would ask, and I would appeal to you to really ask hard questions of the Lula government. There are people here who are putting themselves at risk. We will follow their return very carefully, and I can tell you that there will be no stone left unturned if any harm comes to any of these amazingly courageous men and women who have traveled here. It's just, sadly, Brazil is moving in the direction of anarchy. And the rule by law, as I said before, where they use, prosecutions against people with whom they disagree with as a way of just silencing the opposition. We saw it in Nicaragua most recently, when all of the presidential candidates were arrested. So Ortega had nobody running against him. We saw it when he arrested everybody in the church, including Bishop Alvarez, who has now been let go, but he's been exiled. So what I'm saying is that we are going to be following this very carefully, and it's not just me, and it will be bipartisan. And my hope is that the administration will join us. These men and women are men and women of courage and of great valor, and their words need to be heard. So please investigate, I say to the press. Thank you very much.
Can we, a gente pode tirar uma foto aqui geral?
Obrigada, já sabia que estava precisando de uma bandeira aqui.
Tudo bom? Você faz uma para mim também?
Acho que o púlpito representa, né, cara? O púlpito representa.
Lili, tira uma para mim também.
A gente vai passar um pouquinho pro lado e aí não vai ter o púlpito.
Não, isso é...
Não, mas o púlpito é legal.
This is good. No,
The pulpit is good.
Yeah.
I don't want to block it.
No, it's not.